Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is C Raptor, and today we're bringing you a first look at Tier 10 German aircraft carrier Manfred von Richthofen. That's right, here we are, the top of the line. A ship with a name of this pedigree deserves to be fearsome. So let's root around under the hood here and see what we've got. Now, most of the Tier 10 carriers we have in the game are very clearly purpose-built designs. Just as clearly, Manfred von Richthofen here is not. You can see she's built on top of a battleship hull. In this instance, this is the hull of an H-class battleship represented in-game as Tier 9's Friedrich der Grosse. Her health pool is kind of right where you'd expect it to be in the mid-60s, 65,000 and change HP, pretty typical of a Tier 10 carrier. Surprisingly, this shocked the hell out of me when I looked at it, she is the stealthiest Tier 10 aircraft carrier in the game, with an aerial detection radius larger than her surface detection. What? Wait, what? We haven't... What? I think there's a typo here. Something's transposed. We haven't seen ships with an aerial detection higher than their surface detection in a long time. Like, old school RTS Midway used to be this way. I think even Lexington was... Old school Lexington was like this. So, I suspect we're going to see some changes here. This doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Richthofen, pretty slow here for 32 knots. I mean, that's decent speed, but let's just put this, she's not the fastest Tier 10 carrier. She gets okay. And of course, she handles like a whale, 1,200 meter turning circle, 16-second rudder shift time. I mean, yeah, she's a carrier. This is not a cruiser, okay? Armor-wise, Richthofen has a surprising amount of protection for an aircraft carrier. Obviously, seemingly, I should say, based on the battleship hull that she's built on top of. Her armor belt here, 150 millimeters. Now, that still trails Midway's belt, which is 178 millimeters, but this is still nothing to sneeze at here. Additionally, she carries more of this, right? This 150 millimeter belt starts way up here, almost just below the flight deck, carries all the way aft, all the way back, and stops here kind of as you start to get towards the end of the flight deck, and there's still a 90 millimeter belt back here over the steering gear. On the other end of the ship, she carries a 60 millimeter bow strake all the way to the bow, right? So, yeah. Unlike all the other German carriers, she actually invests some armor in her flight deck, right? We've only seen 25 millimeter flight decks up to this point. Here on Richthofen, 50 millimeter flight deck. Now, this still lags behind like every other Tier 10 carrier, okay? Midway's flight deck is 87 mils. Hakura uses 95. Audacious's center section over her Citadel is 102 before it tapers off at either end. So, I mean, it's not to write home about, I suppose, but it's still noteworthy. It means that dropping shells, HE shells onto this ship's flight deck from long range you're not going to get much out of them, which, if you're playing a destroyer against a top-tier carrier, you're depressingly used to. Now, I will point out, she does retain the turtleback armor of the battleship. I have to turn off the right things to show it to you. Here we go. So you can kind of see it right there. That little angle, right? So she's got that 150 millimeter turtleback, just like Friedrich der Grosse does. So she keeps that. Her secondary armament is comprised entirely of the same dual-barreled 150 millimeter turrets we saw previously on Tier 8's Parseval. Now, these are finally off the flight deck, as Richthofen packs 6 of these just below each side of the flight deck. These have a range of about 7.2 kilometers. You ought to be able to buff these out to around 10 kilometers or so, 10 and change. I haven't run the numbers. It's going to be something like that. But we'll get into testing to see if she or any of these other ships in the German carrier tech tree have the improved secondary dispersion that Graf Zeppelin does baked into the hull. I'm willing to bet money that they don't. As you would expect of a top-tier carrier, Richthofen's AAR is appropriately punishing. She moves up to quite a few of these double-barreled 55 millimeter Garats like those you find on Kurfürst and Hindenburg. Man, I really wish they'd slap a few of these on Z52. Grumble. But enough about the hull, right? It's not why you're here. Let's talk about the air wing. Remember, guys, everything we have to go on right now is raw numbers. We don't know reticle size. We don't know reticle shape. We don't know the spin-up time or the cool-down time on each of the attacks. All of these things played a factor in understanding how individual plane types played. We can make some inferences based on the numbers. So we can do some theory crafting, but remember that's what we're really talking about here, okay? All right, so let's get to it. Starting with the attack aircraft, Messerschmitt 155 Golf. Hey, look at that! Low plane health. You should be used to this by now. Yep, these Messerschmitts trail even Hakuryu's Mitsubishis in terms of health. Now, they're pretty quick, right? 172 knots, which is nice. They're going to need that in order to survive runs against the cruisers that these AP rockets are designed to harass. Yes, we're still packing AP rockets here at Tier 10. Now, this is a tier where you start running into Minotaur and Worcester and Des Moines and even Goliath's AA suite is nothing to sneeze at. Hindenburg, right? I can't imagine it's going to be much fun to drive planes with this little health into some of those AA bubbles. So I guess we're going to see if this concept pans out in testing. The interesting part is that these AP rockets now move up to really big hit numbers. These are 5,000 damage per rocket, with 6 rockets in each salvo. So these things basically now hit like Hindenburg AP shells. So I'm intrigued, right? Consider me intrigued, but it's still all about the penetration values and reticle size and bounce angles, and we don't know those things, so there's still a ton of question marks for me around these mechanics. The torpedo planes are Focke-Wulf TA-152s. These are the exact same torpedo bombers found on Graf Zeppelin. Now I'm going to make a bit of an aside here, okay? Now that we're starting to see a tech tree, remember Graf Zeppelin has existed in a vacuum up to this point, but now what we're seeing, right, is that Zeppelin is kind of in this weird, almost like Saipan niche, where she is packing high-tiered aircraft for her nation. Kind of interesting. But anyway, these are, again, just like Zeppelin's torpedo bombers, these are crazy fast, blowing out the speed of like every other nation by at least 30 knots. Now, unfortunately, the ordnance they're carrying is still these bizarrely slow 25-knot torpedoes. I really do like the idea of air torpedoes that hit really hard with fabulous flood chances on fragile planes, the sort of attack you save for big moments in a game or for punishing really bad positional mistakes as a carrier player. But these torpedoes are so slow, I just have no idea how players are going to be expected to land reliable hits, if ever, right? I just don't see it. I don't know. I mean, I've said this on every ship of the tier, and I feel like at the tier 4 and the tier 6, a lot of the battleships down there are slow enough. Okay, I get it, right? But for the tier 8 and the tier 10, man, I'm just not. I don't think it's going to work at all. I mean, we'll find out, but I just don't think it's going to work. Lastly, let's check out these dive bombers. Give me a better angle than that. Come on. There we go. That'll have to do. Well, whatever. I kvetched pretty hard about Parsifal's AP bombers being strictly inferior to Shokaku's down at tier 8. And for the moment, that is true. Moving up to tier 10, it might still look that way, if you look at the plane health and everything. But, as with the torpedo planes, Richthofen's dive bombers are the Focke-Wulf TA-152s, and they are stupidly fast. So this gives them an interesting advantage over Hakuryu's dive bombers. Richthofen's bombers will spend far less time hanging around in Aeoras and can get around the map faster. This is good because these planes have a radically low amount of health. These are like Ryujo dive bomber levels of plane HP. So they need all the advantages that they can get, since the bombs also do less damage than Hakuryu's. I'm less down on these bombers than I was on Parsifal's, and it's all about the speed. It's all about that speed. If you can make the speed work, then they offer something that Hakuryu cannot. But if the speed is not there or not as good as we need it to be, then Hakuryu's dive bombers are going to remain just strictly better across the board. At the moment, as we get out, now we're done with the line now, we've kind of looked through the whole thing. At the moment, the overall German carrier flavor seems to be like resilient hulls with pretty good damage and solid armor, above average stealth, which is a little surprising. I wouldn't have predicted that. AP rockets, of course, on the attack planes for harassing cruisers, torpedoes that hit like trains but move like snails, and AP bombs that are slightly weaker or at least a slightly different flavor than their Japanese counterparts. There's not nearly enough data to be able to speak intelligently about these AP rockets yet, so I'm just going to leave that out there and just say, we'll find out. We'll find out more later. The torpedoes interest me, and I've said this a couple of times. Hard-hitting torps carried by basically what amounts to glass cannon airplanes that are pretty quick, but right now, landing hits with as slow as these torpedoes are, it just sounds almost impossible. especially at high tier. Like, yeah, tier 4, tier 6, tier 7. Okay, maybe. Once you start seeing tier 8 battleships, tier 9 battleships, these ships have 30 knots of speed. You can't hit them reliably with a 25 knot torpedo. That's insane. The AP bombs look, on paper, like the most reliable part of the attack armament, assuming we get a targeting reticle that isn't as broken as the one we have on Graf Zeppelin. I just don't know, guys. I'm really glad to see Wargaming stretching their wings and trying to innovate new things for the carrier class. I really am. It's been a year and a half since carriers went through their rework. We've seen them dabble with some interesting things a little bit. Kaga kind of stands out as a unique kind of carrier in the new system. She carried over her flavor from the old system, but the way she functions in the new system is very different. Indomitable is really the one that I would point to say that is unique, right? No torpedo planes, small squadrons, high health, high speed. But I don't know. I feel like some of what's I just don't think all this stuff is going to survive testing. I think we're going to see some pretty radical changes. I feel like we have to see some pretty radical changes to these ships before they come to live for people to play. Otherwise, these ships are just going to be dead on arrival. I just don't see any other way around it right now. That's the voice of someone who hasn't played them, so take that with a grain of salt. Alright guys, well, there you go. We've looked through the whole line now. I've got a video coming later today. We'll have a look at the new Tier 10 American carrier, Franklin D. Roosevelt. In the meantime, be safe out there, wash your hands, and I'll catch you next time.